Well, good morning. It is April 23rd, and this is our Big Country Wheat Update. I'm Steve Estes, County Extension Agent for Ag and Natural Resources here in Taylor County. I'm joined today with Greg Wilson. He's Extension Program Specialist in Integrated and Pest Management. He's based out of San Angelo, but works our area and works with a lot of producers and extension agents in many counties out here in West Texas. Where's the wheat at now? We are in the home stretch, getting ready to get close to maturity. Our wheat we've moved from boot to ripening really fast, and our wheat is looking pretty good overall. And thanks in part to a recent rain, something that was really needed. This last weekend, we did receive some much needed rain, good, slow, soaking rain at that. If you noticed, if you're in the area, you noticed that it was much cooler temperatures as well. What that same storm system did was up in Kansas, some areas saw snow and some freezes up there. Their wheat is not as far along as ours is, but it is starting to mature as well. And some of that cold weather could spell some setbacks for some of those acreages in Kansas. So much so that the markets reacted yesterday with a higher wheat price based on the news coming out of this storm system up there. So that could be some good news for our producers in the Big Country as we get closer to harvest coming up. We are seeing some acres being laid down for hay right now around. We've got about a total 370,000 acres planted in Taylor and the surrounding counties right now. 105,000 of that was certified through the Farm Service Agency for grain, but additional acres there, you could have been dual purpose as well. We, again, looking pretty good. So we're joined today with Greg Wilson. Greg, thank you for being on today. Greg, he primarily works with pests, and we've had some pests throughout the growing season. At this point right now, we're in the home stretch. It's not as big of an issue. Well, I mean, it could be, but we're not necessarily seeing the issues right now, but there have been in some areas throughout the season some issues with pests. And Greg, one thing we've talked the last couple of weeks is rust. Rust being an issue. Some producers were dealing with that. Let's start with rust and go from there. I know rust, and then it also ties in with some other pests that affect wheat. So, what are you seeing in the areas where you work in pest management there as far as rust goes, and then moving on to like thrips and other things?
Sure. Well, first off, Steve, thanks for having me on, and howdy to all the producers in your region. Well, speaking of rust came in February, in late February, early March. We really started seeing its appearance. Now, one of the reasons it was really detrimental this year is because we had so many dry periods as well as very hot days during late February and March. We had some abnormally hot days. We also had a little bit of rainfall. So the lack of moisture plus the combination of heat forced all the rust that landed to really hijack those wheat plants to take as much water from them as possible. So any of the fields that had consistent coverage of leaf rust or stem rust, or stripe rust, stripe rust was particularly more abundant this year than leaf rust, as far as what I saw from northern Runnels all the way to southern Tom Green. But once stripe rust and leaf rust get established in the field, they're going to use the water that the plant has sequestered for itself. And so many people, as you're driving, you're able to see the glaucous color. The word is glaucous, but it's blue. It's like a waxy coloration of all the wheat plants that you can see as you're driving along on the highway. And so whenever a pest infestation like spider mites, or if you have aphids come in big numbers, but particularly the rust, stripe, and leaf rust, when they're uniform across a field, all those plants are going to change color and try to hold on to as much moisture as they possibly can. And since they didn't get more moisture in return from rainfall this year, we went from having a really good looking crop this year to really struggling to get this last inch. This last inch probably saved us. We're real excited. We got 1 inch, and like you said, it was a nice, slow, constant deep penetrating rain with cool weathers that let that water stay in that top foot profile for as long as possible so that these wheat plants can, finish this hard dough stage and get through soft and hard doughs with that last inch. It's just a miracle that we got that rain. But stripe rust was really, really impactful, especially for those, that really didn't get on it to get a spray out. But from what I saw, most people went out early, took care of it with a fungicide, or they waited until they actually saw stripe rust in the field, and then they went over the top with a rescue spray. And in both scenarios, it worked. So managing stripe rust, we managed it pretty well this year, even though the drought did make it quite worse. The other thing that made it worse is because of the hot weather in mid-February, we had 20 thrips per plant. I mean, we had a significant thrips outbreak in our wheat that started in mid-February because of that heat. We had a good few days of hot 90s in mid-February, so it kind of tricked all the insects in the field. And so we had an early emergence of most of our pests in the region because of these warm days. And when those thrips, while they really don't mess with wheat, we've never really concerned ourselves with the thrips in wheat. But what they do is they will still feed on that plant. And the method of their feeding leaves openings on the leaves, which makes a perfect opportunistic location for stripe rust and leaf rust to, penetrate that leaf cuticle and get in there and actually start becoming an infection. So it was really. Say again, Steve?
Do you feel that, one, rust, of course, we needed moisture, and Dr. Nolan and I talked a couple of weeks ago about the rust and usually translate to having some moisture. And we did get some rain early on and through the winter. But do you feel the thrips issue really contributed to our rust problems?
I think it exacerbated it. I don't think it really contributed to its spread. We're pretty locked into having wheat have some type of rust every year because of our direction, right? Where we're located in wind, stuff gets deposited here all the time from major wheat growing regions. And so we're kind of expect to have it, and it does need moisture. But a good outbreak can get most of its energy from robbing all the wheat plants of their water. And so we don't necessarily have to have a wet year to have a bad rust year, but it does make it worse.
So down, especially areas where you work a lot in Tom Green and Runnels County, I've traveled through there recently and noticed some fields has been kind of hit or miss. And some fields look really, in areas of the field, really drought stressed. Other pest issues that have kind of contributed to that outside of lack of rain. You and I were talking earlier about maybe some weed issues as well.
Oh, yeah, that's right. So I would say that weeds, especially untreated weeds going into February that were roughly 1.5 feet to 3 foot tall, that just what they do is they'll hover over that wheat plant, and those tap roots, usually a taproot weed is a problem, they will suck up all the available moisture and leave the wheat plants with nothing. And so we saw a lot of that this year, and you can see that in the field just driving along, where you'll see those areas where weeds were that just didn't get over a few inches tall and may not even produce a head because they just do not have enough moisture to continue the stages of development. I wanted to mention one more thing before I forgot about it regarding the thrips outbreak, because it was important. Thrips are omnivorous pests. They eat anything, really, whatever's in their way and whatever they can eat. And one of those things is usually small insects like spider mites and first instar aphids, eggs of other pests, things that are just small enough for them to get their mouth around. They'll feed on them. So they're actually generally very predacious of spider mites and aphids in the early development stages where they're very small. We started this season in late January, early February, looking at a winter grain mite outbreak or explosion of population, as well as some other spider mites. So as I was tracking those populations through early February, that's when I watched this thrips explosion. And then I literally watched the populations of spider mites decline across the region because they had nothing to really feed on except for spider mites and roughly some wheat, which they still don't eat much wheat. So they prefer those, spider mites. And so I saw spider mites crash, thrips take off, and then stripe rust take off. And it was a really unique situation that wouldn't have happened if it didn't get warm mid-February. And so it really goes to show you that no matter how you plan and how you prepare, you got to react to what Mother Nature gives you, because it's all going to change and do something completely unexpected.
Yeah, and in a crazy scenario where thrips, helped with the spider mite issue, but then on the backside, they also maybe contributed to some spread of leaf rust as well. So it's really a catch-22 situation there. Now, let's quickly touch on another issue, especially with the guys who plant wheat early in the falls for grazing. Sometimes going to deal with grasshoppers are still out. The old saying is, you have a really dry year or a drought, grasshoppers are bad, but grasshopper cycles really are dependent on the fall, the preceding fall. So going back to our fall this last year, we did have some rain here and there, but that's when the grasshoppers and the egg lay. What are you thinking maybe moving into this fall for wheat planting season, and what our grasshopper populations could look like?
Well, based on what they look like right now, we've already seen the emergence of first, second. I've even seen some thirds already out in the field as far as the beginning of April. At the beginning of April, we had a large explosion of grasshoppers. They're out there right now, but we've also been in this considerable drought that has not let up. And so they're not going to have very much to feed on. So they're going to be out early, but they don't have as much to feed on, which is going to restrict their movement as well as their development. It'll limit populations here and there. Where we're going to see them to be a problem early on, I would say beginning of the season will be their biggest, is after they become adults during that first month. I think they're going to move into some of the irrigated corn, irrigated cotton, some of these areas that have water within their leaf contents, just because they're trying to survive and there's not much else to go on. Now, as far as the long season, since they were out early, I was catching first instars mid-March, which is a couple weeks early here for grasshoppers. So again, grasshoppers got affected as well with that early warm up in February. And so since they are out early, have less food access, and are going to go into another hot 100-degree summer, I think their populations are going to be suppressed just like last year. I'm kind of having the same idea for fall armyworms. We haven't seen fall armyworms actually in the fall because the vegetation index isn't high enough for those worms to actually move through the river systems and get to us. Now, that just may have been this year and preferential rainfall and just chance. But I have not really had a good fall armyworm test looking at Lomivia for 2 years now because I just can't catch any fall armyworms. And speaking of that, this year we're going to go out and looking at Lomivia or the chlorantraeniliprole product for grain. I'm going to put a test in September 1st. I'm going to plant as early as I can. I may even do August 15th just to try to secure a good location and potential fall armyworms. Because after that September, October period, they're done. They're gone, at least based on the past few years. And since this year is not going to look any different than last year, maybe fewer 100 days over 100, maybe more. I don't know, but it's not going to be any cooler. And it's not going to be any wetter than the past 2 years. So I'm not going to expect them to behave much differently.
So in the National Weather Service predicting our El Nino conditions, which some of us feel like we really didn't get all the hype that we should have got more rain than we did. But the El Nino is already fading away. They've issued a La Nina watch now. It's not great news, not what we want to hear, especially after the last few years that we've had in drought. Hopefully we're all wrong and we'll continue getting rain this summer. we do need a good wet summer. Everything does, I think, in our area. So let's wrap up real quick. Wheat conditions that you've seen around our area. I think in my mind, what I've seen driving around, we're at average, above average, expecting good yields, barring something happening between now and harvest time. You mentioned down in the Runnels County and Tom Green area, some drought conditions have really impacted the wheat there. It's hit or miss. Where else? What other conditions you seeing elsewhere in your area?
So all right, so Runnels and Tom Green have a really unique distribution of ground. If you're south of the river or east of it or north of it, near the mountains, we really have the full run of the gamut for all the different types of wheat you could possibly have right now. We have wheat that's at 2 leaves and dried and crusted, and then we have irrigated wheat that's got gorgeous looking heads on it and ready to go. And it's really complicated how much our wheat was affected because of the drought. You can see it visibly out there where you'll have small patches of green, but the rest of the field is just completely dry. And you can see that preferential watering, how those plants are sucking up the last bit of water. And you can see the circle where those plants outcompeted the rest of the plants around them for water. And so leaving this season and thinking and planning for next season, we really need to make sure that we're selecting our plant populations for wheat, knowing that some of this ground is going to be over competing for water. And so if we have an area that's consistently in drought conditions, we need to lower our plant populations so that those plants can utilize the water that's available more effectively, and we don't have as much competition within our own wheat plants for the available water. Now on irrigated ground and it's running fine, then we'll continue to keep our plant populations high. But putting the same plant population on non-irrigated ground or generally moist area is just not going to work. We need to lower those populations, get it down to 30 pounds or so in those areas, and let the wheat have the best chance for using what's available rather than going with those high populations and hoping for a little bit of yield off of each of them.
Yeah, and certainly something to think about for planting time this fall. Much could depend on what the weather forecast looks like at the time, what current conditions we're in, but it could be a bit in the best interest to lower seeding rates to get there. We've been doing some seeding rate trials here in Taylor County the last couple of years, as well as row spacing. That's something else we've been looking at, and we'll have some data coming up. And speaking of, next Friday, we hope folks come out to our Big Country Wheat Tour. We have two stops that morning. One is in Callahan County. We're going to look at the forage trials there. Then we're going to move to Tuscola and look at our uniform variety trials. We have a lot of different varieties in there. They are looking good this year thanks to the added moisture and the good growing conditions that we've had. You'll get to see Greg Wilson there. Greg's going to join us on that day and talk some more pest management. And you can catch the folks can catch you there that day and ask more questions. We have other great speakers to be joining us as well. If you want to attend, it's free. Thanks to our sponsors. You just call the Taylor County Extension Office or the Callahan County Extension Office and get your name on the list. So we hope to see you all next Friday, May 3rd at our Big Country Wheat Tour. Contact either Taylor or the Callahan County Extension Office. Again, to RSVP. It is free. Lunch will be provided. Great speakers. We'll see Greg on that day as well. So this will wrap up the Big Country Wheat Update for April 23rd. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.